The Dark Room with your hosts, Paul Salvatori and Jordan Randall. Today we're talking with human rights lawyer Barbara Green,
who was recently involved in a case against the Bier Markt for having quote-unquote skanky-ass clothes for their employees.
So I just first want to start off by asking you, in cases of sexism that qualify as human rights violations, what is your role as a lawyer?
Really to advise whether, the first thing to consider is whether someone has a case, right? So whether it's just they feel uncomfortable about an issue. So for instance, with my client, Tierney, does she have a legal issue, or is it just really she's not sure whether it's a legal matter or just maybe an ethical issue or a moral issue? So it's determining whether there's a legal problem that needs to be resolved. Right? Someone can be uncomfortable or feel that something threatens them, but it may not be a legal issue. So that's the first thing as a lawyer you need to determine is whether someone has legal rights. And if they do have legal rights, then what's the best method of pursuing those rights and remedies? So, should you deal with it by, let's say in Tierney's instance, going to the media first? Should you file a complaint to a court or a tribunal first?
Right.
So it's first, is there a legal issue? And secondarily, then what do you do with that issue? How do you pursue your remedies?
Right. And you choose only to get involved if there's a legal breach, not if there's only an ethical one.
Well, I think it would be really expensive to have a lawyer who's going to help you with the process. Now, when we can give, practical advice on how to try to deal with the situation, but, it may be better suited to go to somebody else as opposed to a lawyer who's quite expensive.
Right. Now, I first discovered you through this story, so I was wondering if you can share it with us. Could you describe your involvement in the recent Bier Markt case, uniform case?
Sure. So my client had already tried to pursue a remedy directly with the employer, which, can be a good decision, may not be a good decision in her circumstances. It didn't resolve by her raising the issue directly with the employer without my involvement. So at some point she wasn't seeing a resolution, so she then opted to have legal advice and to retain legal counsel to assist her, because the issue again for her is, she had done some investigation herself, but she's not a lawyer, is to figure out what her legal rights are. Has this issue been dealt with by a court or tribunal before? What were the results of those decisions? If she is on solid ground to claim that there is, any potential claim for discrimination based on sex in her circumstances.
Right.
Right. So, that's where I got involved to give her advice and to guide her through the process. Fortunately in her situation, as a result of public pressure and media, the case was resolved very quickly, and she didn't need to file a formal human rights complaint. She could still do that if she wants to pursue whatever remedies she wants to, but, in my understanding is she hasn't done that so far, and I haven't done that for her.
Right. Actually, in that case, it was so glaringly obvious, at least to me, that there was a kind of human rights violation going on. So what I want to ask you is, in your experience, how aware are employers of what the Ontario Human Rights Code actually says about unfair discrimination based on sex?
Well, it's really interesting. I'm not sure what most employers do or don't know. I think some of them look to the marketplace to figure out what other employers in their circumstances are doing as to some kind of gauge as to what's appropriate or inappropriate. What's nice about the Human Rights Commission, and part of what they do, is really public outreach, and they have their employment guide and really their publication to describe human rights online. So it's really available to all employers and all employees who can look up to get some better sense, without having to seek necessarily legal advice. Obviously, employers should do that if they want to know, what employees' rights are and what their rights are, in the workplace. But the Commission puts forth their own publication called Human Rights at Work 2008, which clearly sets out what dress code obligations are. And clearly, pursuant to that publication, the Commission states that what was going on in Tierney's instance appeared to be discrimination based on sex.
Right.
It's hard to know what employers know or don't know. Obviously larger employers are probably seeking legal advice on a regular basis. Smaller employers maybe can't afford that, so don't do that. and hope that no one comes forward with a complaint. So just because something seems obvious, I mean,
Right.
One thing I had done is looked at what had gone on in courts and tribunals before this date to figure out, what's been decided, and there really isn't much out there.
Right.
The most recent determination of rights is really this guideline set forth by the Commission of Human Rights at Work 2008, third edition.
Yes.
Because there are no, from what I've seen, there are no recent tribunal decisions. The tribunal decisions date back to the 1980s, and as well, there's one court decision that I found also dating back to the 1980s. So there certainly doesn't appear to be anything more recent to give guidance to employers or employees as to what's an appropriate dress code at work.
Right. Any idea why, whether we're talking about the Bier Markt or another company, would want to implement something that's sexist, like the uniform?
I don't think the intention is to implement a dress code that's sexist. I think what's happening in the general marketplace is if people are attending even at family restaurants, at higher-end restaurants, you see waitresses who are dressed in a manner that can be described as sexy, right? I mean, in terms of the fashions that they're being required to wear. So I think employers see that occurring and perhaps think it's okay. And I don't know what the intention is. I mean, one would think the intention is to attract, male customers into an establishment, right? That's the assumption that it affects the bottom line in some fashion, although I have no knowledge about that. And, so I could think that might be what they think the attraction is in terms of setting forth those kinds of dress codes. But I don't think the intention is necessarily to be sexist. Like, I wouldn't assume that Kara's intention was to come forth with a sexist dress code. I think they were perhaps trying to be competitive, and I can't speak for Kara, but, in a way they saw as being competitive in the marketplace.
Right.
But when it violates an individual's human rights, it's inappropriate, and, it would really be up to a tribunal or a court to determine whether, in fact, that dress code is sexist or discriminatory, and that hasn't been determined by a court or tribunal. What seems to be guiding the decision, I don't know what guided Kara's decision, whether it was public pressure or not, but this Human Rights Commission's this document that they've put forth really seems to give some guidance to employers as to what's legally appropriate and what's illegal.
Yes. And one of the things that I found quite shocking about the news story was the comment about the thong. And it got me thinking about the greater culture that we're in. And I want to know, maybe from your experience, if you feel that sexism against women in the workplace is perhaps indicative of a culture that's still largely discriminatory against women.
Well, what I had said in the CBC interview is it's sad that we're fighting this battle still in 2015, and that's correct.
Right.
We're seeing, as I said before, we're seeing in restaurants, that are consider themselves to be family restaurants, you see these kinds of sexy dress codes, or we assume that the servers are being required to dress in some sort of sexy kind of fashion, with similar types of skimpy, tight-fitting, form-fitting dresses, skirts, tight tops, and this is pervasive.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing this all over the place. But again, I don't really think it's the employer's intention to be sexist. I think this is what they consider to be competitive. And
right.
Just because it's being done doesn't make it right and doesn't make it legal. It means
right.
that no one has come forth to seek a decision of the tribunal or the commission on the issue.
Yes.
And that's coming, and as you're probably aware, there are already 2 female servers that have filed human rights complaints against Kara with respect to this issue.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're going to carry this issue forth, there perhaps will be a decision that's issued by the tribunal, hopefully fairly soon, which will give some further guidance on the issue.
Certainly.
So with the case of the Bier Markt, I think I agree with you. They're not consciously implementing sexism, but how do you feel about places like Hooters? Do you think that that's a conscious sort of sexist move?
I don't know much about Hooters in terms of the relationship between the employer and the employees with respect to the contract, what it stipulates. whether that's an illegal contract. I haven't investigated that. I mean, really, my examination was limited to Cara, and what may distinguish, and I don't know because I don't have the background with respect to Hooters, but what distinguished for me the Cara issue is that my client had been working for several years with, was aware of what the uniform requirements were before she took on the employment, carried on in that role with a uniform that she did not find to be offensive or sexist, and then during the course of her employment, the job requirements were changed. So that may be a different situation than Hooters, where perhaps at the outset of the employment, the employee is aware of what they're going to be wearing. And it also takes someone to come forth with a complaint. So someone may not be comfortable, it may not be legal, it may be inappropriate, but if no one comes forth with a complaint, then it continues onwards. Right? So unless you have a human rights complaint that's being dealt with, things may not change. But again, I don't know what's happening, what the differences would be between Earls or Hooters or the Bier Market. I just really haven't looked at that issue.
Right.
Right, Barbara. So in some of the classes that I've taught where we actually cover the Ontario Human Rights Code, we discussed the double bind that women experience in the workplace, according to which they can't be too assertive lest they be perceived as hostile, nor too docile lest they be perceived as a pushover. And I would like to know, do you feel that this bind is widespread today?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a question I didn't expect.
Oh, yeah. Well, just like in your experience, I mean, it's all from your experience.
Well, I'm in a male-dominated field.
Right.
So, I don't know. Maybe there's perceptions, and I'm not a sociologist, and maybe there are perceptions of women out there as to how women ought to conduct themselves in the workplace. But certainly, I don't consider myself to be any less aggressive or hostile or any of those terms, those negative terms, than my male colleagues in my workplace.
Right.
So I really think, perceptions of women out there, I mean, it's probably all over the place, and there's, all kinds of probably sexist perceptions of what women ought to be, versus what men ought to be. My experience would be different than a female server working in the Bier Market because of the cultural environment I find myself in, being a commercial litigation lawyer in a firm with predominantly male clients in a predominantly male environment. So my experience would be different. So I can only speak to my own experience. I think, and I can convey that, from the information, the interviews I had heard about the female servers at the Bier Market versus what was going on with the male servers, once that dress code was implemented at the Bier Market, the female servers felt that they were being subjected to physical harassment in some instances. So customers feeling, as they've described it themselves, male customers seem to feel that it's okay because there's this sort of perceived relationship between a female server and a male customer, that it's okay to put their arms around the female server. It's okay for them to be more physical than they would be with a male server. And that's the information I'm hearing from the interviews. And from my own clients explaining to me what the environment is like. I've never been a female server. So, it's probably, from their perspective, more difficult to be a female server than a male server because you're already being subjected to this sort of perceived relationship and again, this is really their description, not my own, because I don't find I have, my clients who are male or females being more physical with me than they would be with my male colleagues. So that's not my experience. From their perception, the issue becomes if there's already this underlying feeling of relationship that's created between a female server and a male customer, what happens when that female server is required to wear a more sexual uniform?
Yes, exactly.
One that's perceived as more sexual. Now, does that create an environment where male customers feel more comfortable touching them? Now, we haven't alleged any kind of sexual harassment claims, right? That wasn't, our issue that we brought forth was whether or not the dress code that was mandated for female servers at the Bier Market could be considered to be discriminatory based on sex. So,
Right.
the other issue about sexual harassment is one that we didn't look at.
Yes.
So that's one that the female
Sure.
servers, I think, are raising themselves. But in their circumstances, they felt that this, and this is not necessarily my client, this is what I'm hearing from the interviews at large, that, male customers seemed more comfortable, with inappropriate touching.
Wow.
Female servers, I've always said female servers shouldn't be part of the entertainment of the restaurant.
Right.
Nor should women's bodies be used to sell burgers and beer at a restaurant or at a bar.
Right.
That's considered to be inappropriate.
Certainly. And you touch on it, and I'd like to ask you about it because it is a male-dominated field, as you mentioned. I should actually ask my sister about this too, because she's also a lawyer in a male-dominated company. And I believe that she was also at Osgood. I believe you studied there as well, or yeah. So I'd like to just ask, what is it like from your point of view as a woman practicing law today?
I mean, the difficulty, and again, I can't speak for women who working women everywhere, but from my experience, one of the difficulties being a female lawyer, being a lawyer, being a partner, I'm the only female partner in my law firm. And being a female lawyer, I believe what makes it somewhat more difficult for me than for my colleagues is the work-life issue, that I have 2 young children at home, that I'm required to help manage the business, to attract clients, to do legal work. So it's that balancing of the family obligations and the business obligations and my employment obligations. And unfortunately, and I'm not sure what my male colleagues' experiences are, but in terms of, let's say, all the family stuff, so for instance, organizing my children's play dates and organizing appointments for them and dropping them off at school in the morning. So all of that, it makes it more difficult to be a successful lawyer than maybe it would be for my male colleagues. But again, it probably depends. It's an individual experience. Because for them, depending on how involved they are with their children and their family obligations, that would have impacted them as well. And, the younger male associates, I see them being quite involved with their families.
Right.
So I think that's becoming, not so much, that's perhaps not the same experience as it once was, that, younger male associates are very involved in their families. They are attending at their kids' sporting activities. They're doing more of that. But, in my experience, that's been a challenge for me being a female lawyer, it's really rigorous hours, a lot of expectations in terms of the management of the business on top of the family responsibilities.
Certainly. I mean, just for the record, I think just in terms of being an individual, that's quite a feat to be able to do all that. And I certainly know I personally, I could not manage all that responsibility. What does a truly egalitarian society between the sexes look like for you?
It would be one where I would have to answer the question about how does my experience differ from that of my male colleagues.
Yes, certainly.
And it would be a given that we would be, that we would be treated similarly. The difficulty is it can never really happen because I went through 2 pregnancies and breastfeeding, trying to manage all that while I came back to work when my oldest was 6 months old, right? And I missed time from work, right? I can't be equal to my male partners in that respect because they couldn't have children. They physically don't bear children, right? So we can't be exactly equal, right? We just can't, but it's one where, perhaps that's not held against me. And I felt that in my firm, it really wasn't, and I felt that, I'm lucky that I'm in an employment situation where I am and that my employer was really understanding and that I still was able to reach partnership level, notwithstanding the fact that I missed quite a bit of time from work during my maternity leave, and, ended up missing time for obvious family obligations over the years. So, men and women can really never be truly the same because of the circumstances they're in. Like men don't breastfeed, men don't physically bear children, right? They don't miss time for doctor's appointments while they're pregnant, right? We can't be the same, right? But it's being treated as equally as we can be.
Certainly. And I mean, that touches on this question. I mean, whether we're talking about law or any field of work or just the culture in general, what do you think are some ways people might be complicit in sexism without even knowing it?
Well, for instance, when we attend at restaurants like the Bier Market, perhaps we don't even notice what the female servers are wearing, right? So
Right.
for women, we may not even notice. I mean, perhaps male customers notice more than female customers notice. Although again, even in taking that a step further, I do know that with respect to the female servers at the Bier Market, that a lot of female customers were commenting on the outfits. So they were commenting on the dress code. So that may not even be true. I think it's that we just accept things as a given, right? Like if, for instance, I do believe that a male client might be more comfortable giving me a hug than versus giving a hug to one of my male colleagues, right? Just the perception that perhaps, women are more understanding, more sympathetic, more nurturing. So, I mean, those are ways that we're it's okay to cross that boundary with a female lawyer, but perhaps it wouldn't be okay to cross that boundary with a male lawyer, right? So those are some sorts of ways that we don't even notice, right?
Yes.
The fact that, I found what was somewhat disturbing was in reading some of the comments from the CBC cast, and there were over 1,000 people that had over 1,000 comments, and finally I think the CBC just shut down the commenting section because it was so lengthy. But I felt what was upsetting was the comment that it would be, that if the employee didn't like, for instance, at the Bier Market, the imposed dress code, that she just ought to go out and find a different job. Well, that's just maybe not possible for everybody.
Yes.
I just found it was to me somewhat ignorant, because people find themselves in different socioeconomic circumstances. People find themselves different financial circumstances. Not everybody has the same level of education. It's not so simple for people who've invested years of their life in a certain employment to just, pick up and leave and start again elsewhere. It's not so simple. If you've, childcare obligations, mortgage obligations, it's not so simple as saying, okay, I don't like this, I'm going to leave. I found that to be a really ignorant comment. I found it was just very surprising, and it was one that was pretty pervasive throughout the comments. I simply think it's someone not putting themselves into somebody else's shoes and really thinking carefully about their circumstances.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great point, and I'm so happy you mentioned it, because you hear that kind of rhetoric time and time again in cases of sexism like this. Like, if this person doesn't like to wear this or to appear this way for their employer, then they can leave. But
I pointed that out, and it had come across, I've been interviewed, by the CBC several times, and I've been interviewed by various newspapers about this point, and I did say that, that's a last resort, really, is if you can't find a resolution. It may be an option that's on the table, but for many people, it's certainly not a practical option.
Certainly.
And I know my client really loves where she's working, and that wasn't her go-to option.
Barbara, so no, I definitely appreciate you helping us navigate all these different fields, law, sociology, even your own personal experience. So just before I get to the last question, the second one is, this comes from my experience in talking to female friends, that our society has unfortunately caused us to believe, including women, that they, quote unquote, should be silent, small, not seen, including about sexism, and whether you think that this is true and how we might remedy that.
Again, I would say that that's really sad and unfortunate. If that's the truth and that's really how females perceive their role in society to be, that's really unfortunate. Again, I'm probably not the best person to comment on that, because I chose a place for myself in society where that's not my view of myself. Nor is it my view of my female colleagues that choose to pursue a profession that's male dominated, right? We can't be that way. And it's unfortunate. I think there are many reasons, though, why women wouldn't come forward with sexual harassment claims, while women wouldn't come forward and make their voices known with respect to workplace issues. And as I said to the CBC, the issue is that, as in any concern where you have a dispute with your employer, it makes things really uncomfortable to continue employment, if not impossible. So, it's really unfortunate if women feel that those are their rules. It just makes me very sad.
Right. And I'm sorry, I'm just adjusting the volume on the phone. No, thank you. And just my last question to you would simply be just to bring things back to the legal sphere. How you think lawyers might actually, because I know lawyers are, primarily focused on the law, but how they can play a role in actually changing sexism within the wider culture?
Well, I think the Go Public segment for the CBC is an excellent example of that. So, it's not as though we had to attend at a tribunal or court for the beer market to change, or Cara to change its position with respect to the dress code at the beer market.
Right.
Right. So lawyers can be instrumental in assisting to use the media in an appropriate situation, in appropriate circumstances. Right. So lawyers, do play a role in that regard, assisting their clients, and clients have to advocate for themselves too in some circumstances. Mm-hmm. It's the lawyer and the client working together to pursue a positive outcome.
Yes. So I suppose sort of a team effort. Yeah.
And I think, my clients and I did work effectively together, and the CBC, I really commend them for doing such an excellent job with their Go Public segment.
Yes. Yeah, no, I congratulate.
And in encouraging change, with such a large company so quickly.
Yeah. No,
and I also compliment Cara for changing its position so quickly without forcing the tribunal to make a decision before Cara would change its position.
Right. Yeah, no, I see it as a victory. I congratulate you all.
Yeah.
So that's all I have to ask. I'm very grateful for the conversation, Barbara. I know you're very busy.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so thank you and have a great day.
Fascinating to talk to Barbara about such a interesting topic. It's something I think that the male community, it's so easy to overlook,
Right.
Because we don't have to worry about stuff like that. Like pretty much every establishment, the dress code is more or less standard and not revealing, or it's dress as you want.
Right, and a couple things I'm wondering about still is whether there was a lot of thought put into that decision at the head office where they made those decisions about the uniforms and why, like what kind of data they were looking at to make sure that this would be a wise decision.
Yeah, they definitely would have had to collected and extrapolated data to make it fiscally.
Just from a business point of view. And also I'm wondering, because I do talk to a lot of girls about this question about like embracing that look as a kind of self-empowerment. So I'm curious to know, like maybe we can get some feedback from our listeners, our female listeners, about how they view wearing revealing clothing. Is that a kind of empowerment today for them, or do they see that as
the complete opposite?
Sexist, misogynistic, all these sorts of things? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that would be great to kind of get some feedback on the comments, or in the comment section. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what happens about all this too, to see if other establishments, because it's not just Bier Markt, there's also Jack Astor's and notoriously Hooters that have quote unquote skanky ass dress codes. So
right.
We'll see if maybe this is just the first in a domino effect of eating establishments changing their dress codes to make it more of an equal playing field for both sexes that work there.
Certainly, yeah. No, the interesting thing about places like Hooters and things like that is that it's still considered a family restaurant. Those are still, and it says a lot. I mean, about how we still view, maybe as a culture, women dressed in those positions that way as being still appropriate or like family friendly. It's just like the norm for society. Because the men at the beer market weren't really expected to wear anything revealing at all, like with that change.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the women, it was like not really thought of as anything serious until one employee spoke out.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully this does put some affirmative action in motion, and
Yeah.
we do see some changes, because clearly that ain't equality.
Right. So next week we're interviewing a young lady by the name of Allie B. That's all we know. That's her name. She, I believe, wants to remain anonymous in that way, but she's got a very interesting profession, and that is
Selling her panties on the internet. So, until then,
this is the dark room.